Imagine walking into a clinic and realizing the strongest thing in the room isn't the medicine. It's the denial. People saying things so scientifically impossible they could bully gravity into quitting. And trust me, what you're about to hear makes that look normal. 1. A man once informed a doctor with the confidence of someone correcting a Wikipedia article that he didn't need antibiotics because he'd already strengthened his immune system by drinking expired milk for years, claiming it was basically training with live ammunition. He explained this while sitting in an exam room with a fever, a rash shaped like the state of Nebraska, and the overall posture of someone who had lost a negotiation with bacteria. When the doctor gently explained that drinking spoiled milk doesn't give you superpowers, he doubled down and insisted Big Dairy was hiding the truth about natural immunity boosters. He even suggested the clinic test him for enhanced antibodies, which is the medical equivalent of asking a mechanic to check whether your car runs better after filling the tank with mop water. This was a man who looked at food poisoning, shrugged, and decided to pursue it professionally. 2. A woman marched into urgent care demanding an MRI because she believed her brain had shifted positions overnight, which she diagnosed after waking up slightly dizzy and consulting the highest authority on Earth, an online personality quiz that also assigned her a spirit vegetable. She told the physician that she could feel her brain sliding around, as if it were a loose marble inside an empty cardboard box, and she wanted the doctor to push it back. After being told that brains do not, in fact, slosh around like fruit in a blender, she became irritated, insisting she'd seen it happen on a documentary, which turned out to be a clip from a video game physics demo. She was genuinely disappointed to learn her skull wasn't a rental apartment where her thoughts occasionally rearranged the furniture. Her frustration suggested she was ready to request a chiropractor for the soul. 3. A patient once explained to a doctor that he didn't believe in germs because he'd never seen one in person, a statement delivered with the same finality as declaring taxes optional if you close your eyes. He said the entire concept of microorganisms felt too convenient, like a government plot to sell more soap. He then proceeded to cough directly into his hands, which he wiped on his jeans for safekeeping, before asking whether doctors make up illnesses to stay busy. When the doctor mentioned microscopes, he waved it off as fancy magnifying glass tricks and announced that if germs were real, they'd be big enough to fight. Apparently, his threshold for believing in a biological threat depends entirely on whether it can bench press something. The doctor advised him to wash his hands anyway, which he treated like an act of betrayal. 4. A man insisted his lungs were running out of storage space because he'd inhaled too much air during a week of deep breathing exercises recommended by a wellness app that also advertised premium breathing for $14.99 a month. He told the doctor he suspected his lungs were full to the brim and needed to be emptied, as if they were overstuffed suitcases he wanted to unzip. When asked to clarify, he said he feared air buildup was pressurizing his chest like a shaken soda can and might eventually explode if not released carefully. The physician attempted to explain how respiration works, but he interrupted, claiming air should be rationed because the body only needs a certain amount per lifetime. He then bragged about holding his breath for 45 seconds earlier in the day as preventive maintenance. The doctor realized this man had invented his own personal physics class, and he was failing it spectacularly. 5. A woman complained to her dermatologist that her sunscreen wasn't working because she still got sunburned after applying it only once, 3 days earlier, and she was deeply offended that the sun didn't respect the product label. She insisted the bottle said long-lasting protection, which she interpreted as near-permanent unless hurricane conditions occur. She asked the doctor whether her skin was somehow rejecting the sunscreen like a rebellious teenager refusing chores, or whether she was chemically incompatible with SPF. The doctor explained she needed to reapply, especially after swimming, sweating, breathing, existing, all the usual human activities. But she was horrified by the idea she had to maintain it like a houseplant. She concluded that sunscreen companies were scamming her, because if lip balm stays on for hours, why can't SPF face a daylight star? 6. A man told a cardiologist he didn't need medication for his blood pressure because he had invented a mental technique to lower it, thinking calm thoughts so intensely that his heart takes the hint. He claimed he could command his pulse like a dog learning tricks and demonstrated by closing his eyes and frowning with such concentration he looked like he was trying to teleport. When the blood pressure cuff showed absolutely no improvement, He blamed the machine for interrupting his focus and suggested the clinic invest in mind-responsive equipment. The doctor gently attempted to explain autonomic functions, but the man rejected the idea, saying the heart should listen to its owner. He even proposed teaching the technique to medical schools, which is astounding confidence from someone whose heart had essentially written a restraining order against his ambitions. 7. A woman insisted her severe headaches were caused by excess thoughts building up in her skull, claiming her brain overheats from thinking too much, similar to an old laptop struggling to run a browser with too many tabs open. She asked the doctor if he could drain the pressure, offering several suggestions, all of which belonged in a medieval medical pamphlet. When told that thoughts aren't physical objects that stack up like junk mail, she disagreed, arguing her head felt cluttered and therefore must be full. She also wondered aloud whether she needed to delete old memories to free space, hinting she believed the human mind works like a suspiciously cheap USB drive. The doctor recommended hydration and rest, but she left insisting she would declutter her mind using scented candles and a playlist called Brain Detox Level 9. 8. A man confidently told an ER doctor he was dehydrated because his body lost too much moisture through thinking intensely, claiming his brain sweats on the inside when he focuses. He was convinced this internal perspiration was evaporating his water supply, and that mental effort required the same hydration strategy as marathon running. He even requested electrolyte infusion for cognitive workouts, which he defined as concentrating on anything longer than 30 seconds. The doctor attempted to redirect him toward basic hydration habits, but the man insisted his mind was athletically gifted and required special treatment. He concluded by asking whether insurance covers brain sweat damage, which is the sort of phrase that suggests the insurance company should preemptively deny everything he ever files. 9. A patient demanded antibiotics for a viral infection because he believed antibiotics kill all bad energy, treating them like pharmaceutical exorcists instead of bacteria-specific medication. When the doctor tried explaining the very basic concept of viruses, he responded that he didn't subscribe to that theory, as though biology were a streaming service he could cancel. He insisted he knew antibiotics worked because he always feels powerful on them, describing a psychological boost that sounded suspiciously like placebo with a gym membership. When told unnecessary antibiotics could cause resistance, he shrugged and said resistant bacteria just need stronger antibiotics, revealing he viewed pharmaceutical science like a villain escalation arc in a superhero franchise. The doctor handed him tissues and sympathy because the germs weren't the only things ignoring logic. 10. A woman visited a physician convinced she had an internal sunburn because she'd spent too long sitting next to a sunny window and was certain light had penetrated her organs. She explained this with absolute conviction, insisting the sunlight felt hotter than usual, like it had bypassed her skin entirely and seared something important inside. When told this wasn't possible, she countered that microwaves heat food from the inside and sunlight is basically nature's microwave. She even asked whether she should avoid bright days while her internal tissues recover. The doctor reassured her she was fine, but she left carefully shielding her torso from future rays, proving that even star-powered physics was no match for someone determined to invent a new medical condition. 11. A man came in claiming his stomach acid was too acidic because it burned when he thought about stressful things, suggesting a psychosomatic chemistry system in which emotions directly adjust the pH scale like a DJ spinning a turntable. He blamed his stomach for overreacting to anxiety and asked whether he could dial down the acid manually, possibly imagining his stomach had a dimmer switch. When the doctor explained digestion, he shook his head dismissively, saying his body should know better by now. He then speculated that his acid had developed a personality, which he described as spicy and uncooperative. The doctor advised lifestyle changes, but clearly the real problem was that the man expected his digestive system to behave like an employee who needed quarterly performance reviews. 12. A woman demanded a neurologist check whether her thoughts were leaking out because she'd been forgetting things recently, and concluded her brain was losing data through the ears. She asked if her mind had memory holes, which she pictured as little vents where thoughts escape if the room gets too full, as though her skull hosted a poorly managed storage closet. She wanted a test to confirm whether her mental files were slipping out unnoticed, possibly while she slept. When the doctor explained natural forgetfulness, she sighed and said she'd hoped for a more fixable problem, apparently preferring a catastrophic hole in her brain to the concept of normal human aging. She left requesting stronger earplugs, not for noise, but to keep the important thoughts from slipping out. 13. A man informed a doctor that his broken toe wasn't the issue. The real problem was his pain receptors being too dramatic. He claimed his nerves overreact to everything, like melodramatic actors performing in an off-Broadway tragedy titled Al the Musical. He was convinced the pain wasn't real pain, but sensory exaggeration, and asked whether the doctor could tone down the nerve sensitivity, ideally with a remote control. When told pain exists for a reason, he accused his nervous system of lying for attention. He then suggested removing the pain receptors entirely, as if uninstalling a glitchy app. The doctor taped his toe and sent him home with instructions, but it was clear the man's biggest injury was the relationship between his body and reality. 14. A woman swore she was allergic to cold weather because she sneezed every time she went outside, and she insisted this meant her body rejects winter. She described the sensation as her immune system filing complaints, suggesting her cells collectively unionized against the season. When the doctor explained that temperature changes can irritate nasal passages, she dismissed it, saying she preferred her diagnosis because it felt more poetic. She wanted to know whether she should move to a warmer climate for medical reasons, as if her insurance might sponsor a beach vacation. She ended the appointment by asking whether anyone has ever been granted disability for seasonal incompatibility, confirming that her symptoms weren't the only thing drifting in the wind. 15. A man sought medical advice after eating an entire family-sized pizza and feeling ill, insisting his stomach must have shrunk accidentally because normally he can handle this level of commitment. He theorized that something in the weather, or possibly the alignment of the moon, had made his stomach temporarily less stretchy, and he wanted the doctor to reset it. When the doctor suggested he may have overeaten, he seemed personally offended, as though accused of betrayal. He requested tests to confirm whether his stomach was still full-sized, explaining that his digestive system usually respects him more than this. The doctor recommended moderation, but the man walked out muttering about sudden stomach sabotage, apparently believing his torso launched an internal coup. 16. A woman once asked a doctor if her body was running low on blood charge because she'd been feeling tired and assumed her circulatory system worked like a phone battery, eventually draining to zero if not plugged into something inspirational. She insisted she needed a blood recharge treatment, preferably one that didn't involve needles because she found those too electrical. And she spent 10 full minutes explaining how she believed blood naturally thickens overnight like old soup, unless a person stirs it by doing morning stretches. She even asked whether yawning might be her body's low battery notification. The doctor explained things like oxygenation and anemia, but she shook her head, convinced that was outdated thinking, declaring she'd rather trust modern wellness logic. She left vowing to drink beet juice because it looks like blood, which, to her, was proof they performed the same job. 17. A man told a physician he was having trouble sleeping because he suspected his eyelids were too transparent, allowing dreams to escape before his brain could process them. He claimed this caused dream leakage, which he believed resulted in nightmares showing up in other people's minds. Essentially, he thought he was committing subconscious pollution. He asked the doctor whether eyelids can be thickened, maybe with a lotion or a prescription mind tarp, and he recounted memories of waking up tired and insisting that was because his dreams wandered off without finishing their shift. The doctor tried to redirect him to stress and insomnia science, but the man countered with a firm, No, this is definitely eyelid integrity," as if he were filing a warranty claim. He ultimately left saying he'd try sleeping with blackout curtains wrapped around his head to keep the dreams from escaping into the neighborhood. 18. A woman visited a clinic claiming her cholesterol must be too high inside her thoughts because thinking about greasy food made her feel guilty and therefore, in her logic, medically threatened. She told the doctor she could sense her cholesterol levels rising in real time, like a stock market ticker scrolling across her emotions, and she asked whether doctors could perform a mental flush, something she imagined would be like rebooting a misbehaving computer. When the doctor explained cholesterol is measured in the body, not the mind, she frowned as if hearing a conspiracy and suggested that maybe modern science just isn't paying attention to emotional cholesterol yet. She concluded the appointment by announcing she'd start meditating aggressively to drop her numbers, as if inner peace were a pharmaceutical. Apparently, in her world, guilt, oil, and cardiovascular health all share the same inbox. 19. A man convinced himself he was developing X-ray vision because he could see shadows on the inside of his eyelids, which he interpreted not as normal eyelid blood flow, but as preview footage of internal structures. He proudly told the doctor he might be evolving early, like a biological software update, and asked whether he should report this to someone important, perhaps the government. When the doctor informed him this was perfectly normal anatomy, he was visibly disappointed and said he wished the medical community would stay open to possibilities instead of always ruining things with facts. He even asked for a test to verify whether he could scan objects, so the doctor gave him a harmless vision screening, which he failed magnificently. Still, he checked out, declaring he'd continue practicing his gift, because obviously his optic nerves just needed more time to get into superhero shape. 20. A woman told a doctor she feared her heartbeat was out of rhythm with the universe, which she sensed after a bad yoga class where the instructor played music not spiritually aligned with her pulse, and she felt this created cosmic interference. She asked whether her heart could be recalibrated, ideally with something non-invasive like crystals or a playlist curated by someone who understands vibes at a medical level. The doctor attempted to explain sinus rhythm and stress, but she countered that she'd never had this issue until she started drinking oat milk, which she suspected had different spiritual conductivity compared to dairy. She wondered if she'd absorbed too much chaotic frequency, like someone accidentally downloading the wrong operating system into their chest. By the end, she insisted she'd try humming at her heart until it syncs back with the planet, proving that sometimes cardio problems are less about the body and more about a personal horoscope gone rogue. 21. A man rushed into urgent care because he believed his arm had stopped obeying him, describing it like a rebellious teenager who refused commands. After he woke up on the couch with pins and needles, he declared this was a neurological crisis, not the obvious circulation issue, insisting his arm had rejected his leadership, and he asked whether he needed a neurologist or a therapist for limb reconciliation. When the doctor explained he'd simply slept on it wrong, he demanded proof, saying the arm had never behaved like this before, and therefore could not be trusted. He even lifted it with his other hand and lectured it about loyalty, which did not strengthen his case. The doctor reassured him sensation would return shortly, but he remained suspicious, petting his arm like a moody house cat and muttering promises to retrain it, a plan that suggested his musculoskeletal system was mere minutes from filing a restraining order. 22. A woman came in sure she'd discovered a new medical condition because her eye twitched for 2 days, and she was convinced it meant her eyeball processor was glitching, as if her retina ran on outdated software. She believed her brain was sending corrupted signals to the eyelid, causing involuntary updates she didn't approve of, and she asked if doctors could manually reset the eye, ideally with a button hidden somewhere behind the ear. The doctor explained fatigue, caffeine, and stress, but she rejected this explanation as boringly terrestrial, arguing no mundane cause could explain such an irritating sensation. She insisted she could feel micro vibrations that hinted at some kind of internal error code, which she described with the seriousness of someone troubleshooting a failing server. She left deciding to cut caffeine to test the system, but not before asking the doctor whether blinking too many times could brick the firmware. 23. A man claimed his sense of taste had gone offline after eating extremely spicy wings, convinced the heat had melted the flavor receptors, which he described as little employees in his mouth, who had all quit without notice. He asked the doctor if taste buds can be rebooted individually, or if there's a universal mouth reset function, and he wondered whether insurance would cover taste restoration procedures, which he imagined like hiring new staff. When the doctor tried to explain temporary numbing, he accused the restaurant of serving chemically weaponized chicken, insisting nobody warned him the flavor intensity could cause hardware failure. He also asked whether drinking milk would rehire the taste workers, as if dairy owned a temp agency. He was relieved to hear his taste would return, but vowed to file a complaint anyway because no one should serve food capable of uninstalling a person's tongue. 24. A woman visited a clinic announcing that her stomach made a weird noise, and therefore something inside must have shifted out of place, like loose furniture sliding around during a minor earthquake. She explained that human organs should remain politely silent unless spoken to, and any unexpected grumble was an unacceptable breach of professional decorum. She asked whether her intestines had relocated without permission, possibly during sleep, and wanted an internal map printed out so she could visually confirm nothing had drifted. The doctor calmly explained digestion, but she treated this as a cover-up, suggesting the medical community doesn't want people to know how mobile organs truly are. She requested a test to verify organ positioning, because she was sure her stomach had slid slightly to the left, which she believed she could feel whenever she turned her head. She left unconvinced, promising to monitor her torso for further trespassing. 25. A man insisted he was suffering from oxygen overdose because he'd spent too long outside on a breezy day and felt lightheaded afterward, explaining to the doctor that humans should ration oxygen exposure like a delicate spice, not inhale it freely like some kind of respiratory anarchist. He believed the wind had forced extra oxygen into his lungs, which he described as overfilled, like a balloon someone kept topping off for fun. The doctor clarified that this was not a thing, but he remained worried that breathing too enthusiastically might cause internal inflation, an idea he illustrated with deeply concerning hand gestures. He asked whether vigorous walking could create oxygen pressure buildup, and he seemed disappointed when the doctor didn't prescribe a deoxygenation treatment. Ultimately, he concluded he'd try smaller breaths for a while, admiring his own commitment to responsible breathing limits. 26. A woman asked a doctor to confirm whether her freckles were solar tattoos, believing sunlight imprinted designs on her skin the way a printer stamps ink on paper. She said she wanted to know why the sun kept giving her the same pattern, and whether it was trying to send her a message. The doctor tried to explain melanin, but she preferred her hypothesis that the sun was signing her, and she wondered whether it might be a compliment or a territorial claim. She also asked whether freckles could be rearranged manually into a more aesthetically pleasing formation, as though her skin were a customizable avatar. When told no, she suggested the medical industry lacked imagination. She strolled out confidently, declaring she would wear sunscreen only if the sun promised not to. Get offended, proving an entire conversation had happened under conditions in which the universe itself deserved hazard pay. 27. A man told a physician he feared his skeleton might be loosening, because after a long nap, his joints cracked when he stood up, which he interpreted as structural instability rather than normal movement. He imagined his bones held together with the same tension as cheap IKEA furniture, prone to shifting if the owner falls asleep in the wrong position. He asked whether doctors could tighten the screws in his joints, or at least run a diagnostic to confirm none of the bones were falling out of alignment like badly parked cars. The doctor assured him everything was fine, but he asked follow-up questions like whether bones can sag over time, or if rain increases skeletal humidity. He left with stretching advice and a lingering belief that he might soon require a full-body tune-up at a mechanic. 28. A woman complained that her salivary glands were overperforming, creating too much saliva during a stressful conversation, which she took as evidence that her mouth panics under pressure, like an overwhelmed intern who starts handing out paperwork no one asked for. She asked the doctor whether she could disable the feature, comparing saliva to an auto-refill function she found unnecessary. The doctor explained that salivation is automatic and not a sign of psychological collapse, but she remained unconvinced, insisting her mouth was reacting on its own, possibly betraying her to strangers. She wondered aloud if she could train her tongue to supervise the situation better, preventing the glands from dumping resources, revealing she viewed her mouth as a dysfunctional corporate office. She ended the appointment saying she'd research saliva minimization techniques, which sounded dangerously like a future choking hazard. 29. A man visited a doctor because he believed blinking too often was draining his vision, claiming each blink wiped away clarity like someone repeatedly smudging a camera lens. He described his eyes as optical devices that need minimal shutter use, and he bragged about trying to blink less to conserve visual sharpness, which explained the alarming level of eye dryness and confusion he arrived with. When the doctor explained the purpose of blinking, he argued that if blinking were so important, birds wouldn't have evolved such smug little eyes, which the doctor did not attempt to unpack. He requested eye drops, but insisted they be non-blink dependent, meaning he expected them to somehow apply themselves without eyelid involvement. He left declaring he'd limit blinking to necessary moments only, a plan destined to backfire on his corneas before he even reached the parking lot. And that's the grand tour of medical nonsense, humanity's finest confusion on full display. Drop your favorite disaster in the comments, vote for the dumbest, and hit subscribe if you want more chaos.